Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. In a recent video I made, I had mentioned that I was stacking some food in addition to my silver. And in the comments section of that video, there were some requests to go into a little bit more detail on that subject and the subject of preparedness in general. I think it's natural for there to be some overlap between the silver stacking community and the preparedness community. If you're stacking physical metal, you probably have some understanding of the fragility of the system that we live within, the financial system specifically, but that really is linked to all of the other systems of support that we enjoy in our modern society. Chances are, if you feel the need to have this kind of financial security, you probably understand the need to have other forms of security as well, like food security. Now this is a Mylar bag. This is 5 mils thick and it's packed full of jasmine rice and then heat sealed. And when I heat sealed it, before I did that, I threw in an oxygen absorber and a desiccant into this pack. So this is basically just a bulk food. And now is an excellent time to acquire food because food really is an asset. Just like silver, food is an asset, and it's an extremely important asset that we all need on a daily basis. Those of us living in Western society, I think we probably take the abundance of food that we have access to for granted. Historically, mankind, much of mankind, has always kind of lived on the verge of starvation. That was the norm for most of human history, and it's only in the past couple of generations, the past 100 years or so, since we began using fossil fuels in our agriculture, that calories have become so abundant. In fact, it's really bizarre because in today's society, it's almost the excess of calories that is the problem rather than the shortage of them. So that being the case, it's just easy to take how inexpensive a giant bag of rice is. I mean, you can go to the store and buy a 20-pound bag of rice for 15 bucks. And that's a tremendous number of calories. When you think of $15 and how long you have to work to make $15 at whatever your occupation is, I mean, now 15 bucks in a lot of places is the minimum wage. So let's say 1 hour of work is equal to 20 pounds of rice. Well, how long would it take you to grow 20 pounds of rice? I mean, a lot longer than 1 hour. So the fact that we can get these bulk foods at low prices like we have access to today just makes it a no-brainer to stock up on these. Now, these do take up a little bit of room, but they're definitely a good thing to have around just for calorie security. And when they're stored this way, most bulk foods, whether it be rice or garbanzo beans or quinoa or hard red winter wheat, or even coffee beans for that matter, corn. There's a lot of bulk foods that you could store this way. They will have a very long shelf life. If you include a desiccant and an oxygen absorber, this stuff will last for years and years, probably decades. Now, when it comes to food security, a lot of people out there in the preparedness community, or at least just people in general, one of the things I hear is, well, I know how to forage for this, or, I'm a hunter, so I'll go out and just hunt in the event that there's not food available. Well, I don't know if you guys have ever seen the show Alone, but these guys are survival experts that go out into the woods and they try and survive. And now, mind you, they're in somewhat difficult environments, but they're also out there entirely by themselves, so there aren't other humans competing for resources. And these guys are survival experts, and usually by about day 30 or so, all of these guys are starving to death. Some people do manage to stay out there for longer, but there's not a single one that doesn't lose a drastic amount of weight, lose all their body fat. A lot of them just begin to starve and either tap out or have to leave. So you watch something like that, and I know it's just a TV show. These are real survival situations these people are put into. It just makes you realize how difficult that actually is. As far as a rule for storing calories, well, I would say there's 2 rules for food preparedness in general, but specifically for calories, and that is that anything is better than nothing. So if you can go and put 1 pound of rice away, that's a lot better than having no food stored. And also the other rule I would say is the more the better, because if you've got enough calories to last you or your family a year, it's going to be better to have 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. And similarly, if you have 1 month set aside, it's good, but it's better to have 2 months or 3 months. So whatever is within your price range and also your ability to store food. I'm not saying go all in on food by any means. I would never suggest that with any asset. Whatever you can be able to put away with relatively little sacrifice to your normal standard of living is prudent and a good idea. And definitely you want to have some bulk foods on hand. Now, if you want something a little more flavorful, something like this Mountain House freeze-dried food is a good thing to have on hand. And this is basically like in a whole entree. It's chicken and mashed potatoes, and then the folks over at Mountain House, they use a freeze-drying technology to just suck all the water out of that food. And to rehydrate it, all you have to do is just add boiling water to this. So you open up the pouch and you dump in some boiling water, wait a few minutes, and you basically have a meal. And this stuff is surprisingly good. If you've never tried freeze-dried food, it is actually pretty tasty. Now, it's not cheap. It's going to be significantly more expensive per calorie than something like this, but also significantly more tasty. Whether it be for a morale boost or because you need additional protein or you just want some nutrients, some of this stuff is good to have on hand as well. I would say that if you don't have any bulk calories, getting a bunch of this probably doesn't make a lot of sense because the bulk calories is like your ultimate backup plan. But this stuff is good to have on hand as well. And honestly, I mean, if you've never tried this stuff, I recommend you pick up a couple entrees and try them because they are actually really good. I would put this up against any frozen or microwavable type dinner that you might get in terms of quality and flavor and nutrition. So there's nothing wrong with having some freeze-dried food around and even eating it occasionally. And if you want to buy that stuff in bulk, they do make these number 10 cans as well. So this has got like 10 servings of an entree. You can see one can here has got 10 servings, 230 calories each, so 2,300 calories. And when you start looking at calorie numbers, 2,300 calories is not really that much. You figure if you're a large adult and you're in any kind of situation where you're expending calories, this might be enough food for one day to maintain your weight. This might seem like a lot of food, a number 10 can, but it's really not. And humans eat a lot of food. If you live in Western society, I guarantee you eat more food than you realize. If you keep a journal of it every day, you'd probably be shocked at the number of calories that you consume on a daily basis. It's also important to keep in mind that any situation where there's a food shortage or something like that, it could very well wind up being a situation where you are required to be more physically active than you typically are. So not the kind of situation where you want to be on a calorie restricted diet suddenly. So that's also something to keep in mind when it comes to stacking up food. Probably the easiest way to get started with some kind of food preparedness is just getting some extra staples. I eat a lot of peanut butter personally. I like peanut butter sandwiches. I like just eating it with bananas and fruit and stuff like that. So if you always have some peanut butter on hand, this stuff's got a pretty long shelf life. Even this natural stuff with no hydrogenated oils will last over a year. Having a couple extra of just whatever the normal daily foods you consume on hand is not a bad idea. You can just rotate these out, first in, first out kind of rotation so that you're using the oldest stuff first. And that's as easy to implement as simply just buying 2 of these when you go shopping instead of 1 and just having a little extra pantry space to store the extras. That can go a long way towards getting you through any kind of short-term food shortage problem. And I keep mentioning food shortages. I think that if I had made this video 2 or 3 years ago, there would have been a lot more skepticism about food shortages. But anybody who's lived through 2020 and 2021 knows that it doesn't take an enormous disaster to disrupt our supply chains in this country and around the world. Even minor disruptions, relatively minor, I'm not trying to minimize the crisis that we went through last year, but I think it's important to realize that it could have been a lot worse, and that in terms of logistics and stuff, the disruption from last year was relatively minor compared to what could happen. Even with the relatively minor disruption, there were empty shelves in grocery stores. The grocery stores near me were rationing things. You'd only buy X number of staple things per visit or per day. The food distribution and supply system in this country and really around the world is, I think, surprisingly fragile. And it goes back to taking things for granted. People assume that just because the grocery store has always been full of food that it always will be. And that's just not the case. If you look back historically, abundance is the exception, not the norm. So being prepared for food emergencies just makes sense. And, one of the reasons you want to have some food on hand is if there is a food shortage, let's say, there's hyperinflation or the dollar collapses or something like that. And I mean, that obviously would cause massive disruptions. If the health crisis we faced last year did, then an economic crisis of that scale would definitely cause food shortages. But let's say there is food available for purchase, but you've got to spend silver to get it. Well, you're probably not getting the best deal for your silver. Food preparedness and silver stacking sort of go hand in hand there. You don't want to be put into a situation where you've got to buy, say, rice for an ounce of silver a pound or something like that. I mean, you're not going to be getting it on the terms you want. So having some food set aside and put away will ensure that you don't find yourself in that situation. One other thing you might want to stock up on as far as food goes is salt. Salt is extremely important for human metabolism. You need electrolytes to function normally. If you're doing a lot of physical labor, that is going to be doubly so. If the power's out and you don't have AC and you're sweating a lot, you're going to need more salt. And salt also is going to make bulk foods like this a lot more palatable. The thing about salt is it is definitely one of those things that we take for granted because it's extremely abundant and cheap today. But that really is a recent development. Folks who were drilling for and exploring for oil in the past century found these giant salt dome formations underground and realized you could extract salt from them very inexpensively. But before that, before the fossil fuel revolution, so like 19th century and earlier, salt was a really precious commodity. You had to either evaporate salt water to get at it, or there were some salt mines you could extract it from, but we didn't have these giant salt domes that allow us this extremely easy access to salt. So any situation where trade or global networks of distribution are disrupted, salt, I expect, will become very valuable. Salt was so valuable that the word salary actually comes from the word salt, or the Roman, Latin, I guess, word for salt, because the Romans would pay soldiers and workers in salt. It's also how you say that someone's not worth their salt. That's a phrase that comes from that history of salt being used as money as well. So salt is definitely something you want to have on hand. It's so cheap right now. If you've got any room to stack some of this up, definitely go ahead and do that. And then finally, one last aspect of food security and food preparedness is the ability to produce your own. Seeds, I think, are a good thing to stockpile, although I wouldn't say just stockpile some seeds and forget about them. You'd be better off getting a few seed packets and learning how to grow some food and produce some food. Maybe you could also plant like a fruit tree on your property. If you're doing some landscaping, putting in edible plants is not a bad idea. That way, you'll have some ability to produce your own food. Now, unless you're a farmer or something along those lines, it's extremely unlikely that you'll ever be able to produce enough calories to feed yourself and your family, or at least provide as many calories as you are accustomed to eating. You might be able to produce enough to not starve to death, but you'd be just on the borderline, like most people have been throughout history, those who practice subsistence farming. What growing food does allow you to do is it gives you some nutrient security. Rice and other bulk foods are going to be your calorie security. Growing your own food is going to be nutrient security. Being able to have fresh food is going to be a great supplement to bulk foods like this. Growing your own food will allow you to have nutrient-dense food, and it'll be a great supplement so that you're not nutrient deficient, even if you have enough calories. So these two things go hand in hand. But gardening is really a skill. It's not an easy thing to do. If you want to be able to produce your own nutrient-rich food, get out there and start trying to do some gardening now. And that's something that's not just going to benefit you in the event of a disaster. Having some organic, nutrient-rich food that you can produce yourself will improve your health and your well-being, even if there's no disaster whatsoever. So those are my thoughts on food preparedness, guys. What do you think? If I left anything out or you'd like me to go into more detail on anything, let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see any more prepping topics covered, anything specific, let me know that as well, because this is going to be a new series on the channel and I would love to get your feedback for what you'd like to see me talk about. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more about preparedness, then check out this video right here. Thank you all very much for watching. If you want to see future videos, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Don't forget to like and comment, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker out.